pong days. When I was 12, my aunt and I were very evenly matched at ping pong. She was 50 and visiting from Iran. I would come home from school and she would say, "I am ready for you today." "He has to do his homework first," my mother would say. "After you do your homework, I am ready for you." She was very religious, but that did not keep her from wanting very much to beat me when we played. It was a beautiful revelation for me. The poor women of our country that I felt sorry for because they had to cover their hair wanted to beat me in ping pong. They were even willing to talk about how they wanted to beat me. We had some real battles. We played to 21, win by 2, and sometimes the game got into the high 20s. I was glad she didn't belong to the school of thought that said that an adult should take it easy on a kid in athletic competition. My aunt wore a scarf on her head when we went somewhere in America, and I didn't know if I should feel sorry for her or not. It looked kind of nice to me. I didn't feel sorry for her when we were out. My father had already made it clear to me that religion had ruined our country, but I realized how much I was starting from scratch when my aunt came to visit from Iran. A boy had to go out to a clothing store with his mother and his aunt before he had something to say about religion and his people. He had to hear all the different things his aunt said when they were out, about a sales clerk and about God. And he had to hear them carrying the memory of their ping pong battles together. Religion had ruined our country, but I didn't think people like my aunt had ruined it. I didn't ask my father about it, though. He was always very nice to my aunt, but after the revolution had gone the way it had, he needed a very big rock to carry around with him. And the rock had to be an all-the-time rock. It couldn't be a sometimes rock. Anyway, a man was going to carry around some kind of rock with him, it seemed to me, and I was proud that my father knew what his was. When it was just us, I wanted to carry a rock like his. But when my aunt came to visit, I wasn't so sure I needed one yet. I wasn't so sure I knew myself well enough to know mine. Because whoever heard of a boy and his aunt having furious ping pong competitions? What the heck story did that fit into? Whoever heard of her telling him that if he came to Iran, he'd see what real ping pong was all about? And whoever heard of her saying that just before going back downstairs to pray? I knew a man needed a rock to be strong, but I liked being quick too. I liked being able to go back and forth between what my father carried and what my aunt carried. Enough to keep things moving at least. That was the closest our house had come to Iran. They didn't have to say it aloud. It was enough to move back and forth between. My father could give me an understanding of revolution and a disappointment in it, and a hope for a new one, but he couldn't give me diversity of thought. A boy wants to know what everybody in his country thinks. Opinions are the most interesting thing about people, because he can't wait until he starts having them. When my aunt came to visit, I realized that I was playing at my father's opinions, even if he was right, even if his rock was a beautiful rock and was never one that he expected anybody to carry for him. The fact of the matter was that this woman could run all over a ping pong table, sweating and getting more excited with each point, and any opinions I was going to have about religion and our country had to take her into account. If they didn't, then I was just carrying a rock to be strong, but not to turn into something other than a rock. When we played ping pong, my opinion about religious people was that I had to use the sides more against the one I was playing and to be careful of her spin. At the end of our games, I would be exhausted from the physical movement and the reassessment of beliefs. You got me this time, Paimon, but I am going to be ready next time. That was a close game. Yes, did you know that I was on my school's ping pong team in high school? She talked about Iran in a way that I hadn't heard from my father. His rock was too big for high school ping pong teams. I had dreams of trying out for the basketball team next year in high school, and I was glad to see we had some family tradition for it. And the people in Iran, the girls in high schools, had all the intricacies inside them that were necessary to be a good ping pong player. They were more than just the religious and the enlightened. My father was right about everything he said, and my aunt was right too. It was nice to have the spirit of athletic competition alive at our house. My father looked a little sadly at ping pong, at all sports. He would still play, but at some point he would look at his opponent or at two other participants with an expression that said, "It is nice and sweet and sad that they believe that this matters." And then he would go back to playing, too quick for anybody to be offended. But I would catch it, and sometimes I felt like that was where I was headed. I was headed for some kind of rock, and it wasn't made of religion taking over our revolution, but it was made of arrogance and meanness and other things I found in school. And one place I found them was in the dreams of the other boys who hoped to play on the basketball team in high school. I guess my aunt's ping pong team hadn't had all that stuff. It was just girls believing in ping pong. That's how it was when she and I played. And when it was going good, I couldn't lose. Either I would make the team and I would show the other guys that you didn't need all that other stuff when you loved the game, or I wouldn't make the team, but I would know my rock. What I wondered about, what I really wanted to know, was whether my aunt's religion was a rock, whether it was a meaningful rock that I could support even if I didn't relate. It had all the outward forms of it. It had weight, and it was personal. Islam was a big, imposing force in our house, but when my aunt came to visit, it was her steadfast friend. But I had always thought that a rock was supposed to be self-invented, that it was supposed to be discovered. I didn't know how a book that was written many centuries ago could anticipate how I felt today, let alone provide suggestions for addressing it. My need for a rock had come as a surprise, and so had my father's. But if they hadn't, then we would have never had a time when we didn't see the need for rocks. We'd at least had a little time like that, me believing wholly in basketball and my father believing wholly in revolution. I didn't understand the way my aunt carried Islam because it was the same every day. It didn't have rises and falls, the times when the rock felt like a pebble and the times when it felt like a boulder. She would tell me about God with so much certainty that there wasn't anything left for me to wonder, even though I would see her wonder when we played ping pong. She had it then, a wonder about our movement, our handling of the instruments of the game, the beauty of our time alive. She was as alive as anybody I had ever seen. If she was as alive as that, and she still had something as old as religion inside her, then I could understand how something as new as a revolution could still be relying on something as old and dark as night. It was as though they needed both. They needed both to step forward in time, because the men who stepped forward with nothing but what they were, like my father, did it by carrying more than their own rock. The important thing about Islam was what it did for her. I thought that I might not be a revolutionary because there was a lot about people that I already liked. I liked the way my aunt became happy when she talked to me about God. It wasn't as good as ping pong because that was when both of us were having fun, but it was still nice. I didn't tell her how my father had told me that he'd put aside God, but she probably knew. He didn't pray or observe the fast or anything like that, but nobody criticized him about it. They knew that he'd placed something beautiful in God's place, and he wouldn't say much about it himself. The most he'd say to my aunt was, "Khanum, we've seen the presence of religion in our country since the revolution, but God has been a little harder to find." And she would agree. The man who could be funny about it has a chance, I would think. I would remember it the next time I lost to my aunt in ping pong. "I don't think God likes me." She would laugh. "God loves you very much. Well, let's play again and see." And we would, because she would be going back to Iran soon enough. And I knew how much I would miss her and our ping pong games and even God when she did.
Yeah!